Hello there ladies and gentlemen, TX141 here, also known as Paul, bringing you another pair of Ace in a Day gameplays for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's instalment, I shall be reviewing the Messerschmitt 410 A-1. To provide you with a brief historical overview of the ME410 and the variant depicted here in War Thunder, we must go back to the autumn of 1941, whereby the ME210, the original replacement for the Bayerische Flugzeugwerke 110 Zistora, was being introduced into combat service. The ME210 essentially had a number of faults and a number of accidents, which caused its service to be scrapped as of April 14, 1942, despite the fact that a number of the flaws were being replaced or improved as of March 1942. Nonetheless, the successor to the failed successor was being developed in the form of the ME410 as of April-May 1942, with the first prototype, ME410V1, undergoing its test flights as of autumn 1942. If I put a picture of an ME410 up against a picture of an ME210, it'd be very difficult to see overall external differences, despite a slight change in the wing and tail structure of the aircraft and the switching of the engines to a pair of inline Daimler-Benz 603A 1750 horsepower engines. Nonetheless, this was reciprocated in the test flights for the 410V1, whereby pilots commented that it was no more exceptional than the 210, yet by comparison with the 110, the plane was a masterclass. And so, the plane was rolled out into combat service as of January 1943, with the first variant, the A-1. The plane was to undergo a number of roles during the course of its history up until the end of 1944, including but not limited to heavy fighter, Schnellbomber or fast bomber, and formation destroyer or Zistora. It was quickly found that the plane went up against equals, if not superiors, over the course of its lifespan, which meant that it had to be terminated from its roles. For the heavy fighter and Schnellbomber roles, the British RAF Mosquito quickly found itself superior to the ME410, despite the fact that the 410 acquitted itself rather well against its British counterpart. In the same regard, the arrival of the P-51 Mustang to escort the American B-17 formations meant that the ME410 could no longer set itself up in formations to attack the B-17s without respite, and so the massive losses incurred by 410 formations as of the summer of 1944 led to the termination of the 410's lifespan by the end of that year. The variant we see here in War Thunder, the A-1, as already mentioned, was the first combat service variant, a Schnellbomber being able to mount up to, internally, a pair of 1,102 pound SC-500 bombs. On top of this, the plane was equipped with a pair of 7.92mm MG-17 machine guns and a pair of 20mm MG-151 cannon firing from the nose forward. For the rear, the plane had a pair of 13mm MG-131 machine guns firing from barbell turrets and controlled by the radio operator who sat back to back with the pilot. The radio operator controlled both guns via the use of an FDL remote control system, and both pilot and gunner were shielded by limited armour. Nonetheless, the plane was used in both the Schnellbomber role and the Zistora role until the arrival of the B-1 variant to replace it as of the summer of 1944. Ergo, with our rather complicated history out of the way, how exactly does the ME410A1 handle in War Thunder? Well, over the course of the two gameplays I have for display today, I want to consider the fact that the ME410, out of the three main heavy fighters that I would classify as the ME410A1, the Beaufighter Mark VI and the Ki-45 Hay or Tay, at roughly battle ratings 3.0 to 3.3, the ME410A1 is the true energy fighter of the three. Now this does not include, say, the P-3 or indeed any of the American heavy fighters slash bombers such as the B-25 Mitchell. However, I find that the three heavy fighters I have outlined to you are essentially the ones which most clearly determine the heavy fighter category. Yet, I've become rather distracted here. As we can see already from the start of this game, that we climb rather well in the ME410A1, and this is thanks to the fact that the plane has a climb rate comparable to that of, say, a Yak-1B, a Spitfire Mark 5B, a Messerschmitt 109 E3, and planes of that type. Yet, this plane cannot outclimb, say, a Spitfire F Mark 9 as depicted off in the distance at roughly 6.4 kilometers, nor can it outclimb a Messerschmitt 109 F4, meaning that there will always usually be a plane that is just able to outclimb you, and the same applies to, say, a Focke-Wulf 190 A4 or an A1. That plane just has a slightly better climb rate than your own aircraft. However, due to your rather powerful climb rate, and indeed your rather powerful engines, you are able to accelerate very well from low to medium or even from medium to high speeds. And as you're about to see, this means that you can influence a number of dogfights with single-engined aircraft quite well. This Spitfire F Mark 9 is probably aware of our presence and does not want to go up against our pair of 20mm cannons in the nose. I cannot turn with the Spitfire F Mark 9, which is to be expected, as I am a heavy fighter, and so I decide to break off and engage this P-47D Thunderbolt, attacking a friendly Ki-45 Kotoru. At the same time, the Spitfire F Mark 9 now tries to keep after us, yet our gunners are warding them off and warning of us of their presence. At the same time, we are able to maintain just enough speed at roughly 580 km an hour to essentially keep the Spitfire at arm's reach until they are intercepted by a friendly Wellington, Ki-45 and a pair of P400 and MiG-3 both climbing up to attack the Spitfire mid-stall. At this point the Spitfire tries to break away, but as you can see at roughly 390 km an hour we are matching the Spitfire for speed, and I can now spray 20mm cannon rounds along with machine gun rounds towards them to try and make them break ground. Soon our friendly Ki-45 Co, flying from below, manages to force the Spitfire to break up along with the Wellington's gunners, and it is here that we quickly dispatch the Spitfire due to our rather impressive armament for our battle rating of 3.3. As we level out with our 4th kill in the bag, we must now refer to our opening boom and zoom pass. We saw that we eliminated 2 enemy fighters very quickly, with one of those planes being a Spitfire Mark 2A. That was due to the fact that we used the overall speed and acceleration nature of the Me-410A1 to our advantage. Yet we highlighted in that initial pass as well that this plane loses a good portion of its control surfaces beyond a speed of 550 km an hour, most notably its responsiveness in terms of its roll rate or ailerons and its overall rudder response, which even at moderate speeds is not very responsive. Now here I put my nose down in order to prepare a boom and zoom run, but I also switch off my engines to conserve their overall temperatures, as the engines in the 410 overheat quite quickly, even without any damage. We soon pick up our speed and we are about to highlight the problems of the controls with speed. At already 690 km an hour, the roll rate has stiffened to an incredible extent, as I try to put a shot in on this MiG-3, who realises my presence and just has to cut under me quite easily. However, fortunately for me, a Ki-61 Mark 1 Otsuhian decides to break up right in my firing line. Yet as you can see, I am not making any major efforts to bring myself onto target. If I have to overshoot and break off, I have to do so. I cannot force my plane to turn fight with single engine fighters, as they will all be able to outturn me. Here we have a Focke-Wulf 190 A1 who decides to break away once again, either to land or they simply make the indecision not to attack me head on, thanks to my rather impressive nose-mounted, nose-concentrated armament by comparison with their 20mm cannons and their wings. As a result, in a good portion of head-ons you will find that you will win the head-on before your opponent can get a good portion of damage onto you, thanks to the fact you have a central mounted armament, all based in the nose, rather than the wing-mounted armaments of a good portion of your battle rating contemporaries. So we level out, and with already a good portion of kills in the bag, I believe it is 6 now, we decide to once again highlight at this point how we can build up our speed and implement our plane's overall climb rate in order to build up our position very rapidly. We are close to the central airfield here, and most of our opponents are at roughly 3 kilometers away. Yet already we're up to 1,500 meters, and nobody is climbing to face us. We're also maintaining a speed of 350 km an hour and gradually descending, yet we counteract this in the wet pushes in order to maintain a speed of roughly 350 decreasing to 330. Although here I decide not to implement WEP in case I need to make a break for it. Again, we're able to command a position whereby we can once again boom and zoom effectively. And here as I level out, I start to pick up my speed quite quickly for a heavy fighter, especially by comparison with the Beaufighter Mark 6 which I've previously reviewed. We decide to break down on an enemy Typhoon, who quickly dispatches their distance on us, and we pick on a P-40E Kitty Hawk instead, catching them as they break out of a turn rather unaware of our presence, and, quite fortunately for us to make it 8, that Typhoon breaks right in front of our firing line. and as you can see we have to make minimum effort in order to bring ourselves onto target. And that is the overall nature of the ME410A1. It is essentially get the most out of the plane for the least amount of effort, force your opponents to fly on predictive paths in front of your guns. And so, let us review the first set of stats for that airfield domination game on the map Zhengzhou. So, upon reflection we can see that our 8 kills allowed us to earn 24,352 silver lions. On top of this we earned 1,212 research points, with 485 of those going towards our research on the ME163B. We conclude from that initial gameplay that we were not able to achieve an altitude advantage over all of our opponents instantaneously, as we saw with that Spitfire F Mark 9 which originally did try to fly over and dispatch us. Yet at 2 kilometers away we decided to break off into an energetic boom and zoom run, and we carried that through over the enemy airfield at B. We used our overall speed conservation and ability to come out of a dive with a high top speed in order to fly, gain some distance and gradually rebuild our position. I personally feel we caught that Spitfire F Mark 9 by surprise, along with their friend in the P-47D Thunderbolt. And so we played a rather conservative defence, going on to an offence whereby we essentially applied ourselves in a long distance boom and zoom roll, maintaining our energy state and picking off our foes when we could catch them in the midst of say a dogfight or in the midst of repositioning and rebuilding their energy. We will very shortly see the statistics for that game. Yet it already goes to show that the ME410 by comparison with say the Beaufighter is nowhere near the manoeuvrable all-rounder that the Beaufighter was. Instead we are playing a very linear and vertical role. We have had to make some sharp turns, yet nothing of the sort that we could achieve in the Beaufighter, and really all of our manoeuvres have been limited. As soon as our opponents have broken out of the way of our guns in terms of the lead we can provide, we've had to break off, abandon our pass and rebuild our position, simply because that is the safest way to ensure the 8 kills which we achieved in this game. As we can see, we led our team, not by a huge margin, but because we implemented our plane to its full effectiveness against opponents who on the whole will always be more manoeuvrable than ourselves, even if they are flying something that's less manoeuvrable, such as an LA-5, with a slightly more extended turn circle than say an A6M2 Raisin. And so, with this first game concluded, we must point out that the setup we used, and that we will use in the second game, is as follows. 500 meter gun convergence, as all the guns are in the nose. Air target ammunition for the 20mm cannons, as that belt consists of the highest proportion of high explosive rounds. Stealth ammunition for the 7.92mm machine guns. Really, the 7.92s do very little damage, but this has a good concentration of armour piercing and incendiary rounds for penetrating occasional fuel tank points and catching opponents by surprise or measuring up on your target. And finally we are using a 45-minute fuel load, the lowest we can load whilst maintaining a fuel load for the end of the game. So let us move on to the second gameplay. So we move on to a ground strike game on the map Fjords, and we are using the same setup as before, although I must admit I forgot to mention that I'm using armour piercing rounds for the 13mm turret. The reasoning behind this is because the armour piercing rounds in my opinion are more likely to damage key components such as Taylor's engines, and so I'm more likely to get the kill or force an opponent off my back rather than using the standard default belt. Although I will be honest, I've yet to achieve a single kill with the rear turrets, whether manually mounting them myself or letting the AI do its job. And so we return to this game, and we can see straight away that we are going to implement the climb rate and the overall engine power of the ME410A1 once again to build our position. And as we can see in the distance from the enemy bulk formation, that there is a Focke-Wulf 190 A4 at 6 km right at the top of that formation. We are also going to have to contend with an enemy Kitty Hawk, a P40E, a MiG-3 and a Focke-Wulf 190 A1 all towards the right hand side of the enemy formation, and, especially in the case of the P40E, all coming over to my direction. Soon that Kitty Hawk is going to stall out, as I eventually look at them at roughly 1.6 kilometers. And at the same time the enemy Focke-Wulf 190 A4 up high has decided to break off to the side in order to try and build their speed up, and overall altitude it would seem, thinking that I will eventually stall out and either be a victim of the bulk of his friendlies, or that I'll simply have to re-engage someone else. Yet they have underestimated the overall climb power of the ME410, and I very quickly dispatched them as their indecision to come at me head on means that they put their nose up a little bit more, and I have a very clean shot on their underside of the fuselage with my 20mm cannons. And so now, through a very aggressive initial push, I've already gained the higher altitude domination position. I can now pick my targets at will and not have to worry about any resilience or respite from any highly manoeuvrable enemy fighters by comparison with my own heavy fighter. And so I begin my onslaught by attacking the Junkers 87D5, whose pilot is actually quite smart at this point and decides to go into a dive to build up some speed before levelling out and using their gunner to fire at me. Whilst I'm able to achieve a couple of hits, I can't quite get my 20mm rounds onto target. I mean, not only achieve a critical hit on their left aileron tabs. Nonetheless, I decide to break off at this point, implementing what we did in that Jingzhou game, the fact that as soon as an enemy target breaks out of our firing line, we can no longer continue to engage, simply because we do not have the capacity to manoeuvre like most of our mono-engined counterparts. If it had been, say, an enemy bow fighter, I would have continued my push, simply because I may have been able to keep behind them for a little bit longer, although in the most instances I will just normally break off and start again. And straight away we've levelled out at 3,600 metres and we are rebuilding our speed. We're already back to 380 km an hour, and I think at this point that I may be able to hit the enemy Aerocobra, although I soon quickly realise there's a couple of enemy fighters coming out of spawn, most notably this BF-110 who is clearly gunning for me, and we also have a H-6K and a B-25 pair of bombers at a distance of roughly 5 km to eventually contend with. So, the BF-110 comes up at us, but they do not anticipate our overall position and our ability to climb away. So as we loop round here, using our rudder to bring us around a little bit slower than intended to avoid the brunt of the BF-110's onslaught, we force them to stall out just as we come down on them to dispatch them for our second kill. As we can see here, whilst our overall rudder control is not very responsive by comparison with, say, the KI-45, we're able to use it just to put ourselves in a nice position to avoid the brunt of enemy fire. And that sharp turn at roughly 550 km an hour shows how flat turns in the ME410A1 are actually quite good. And we'll talk about this a little bit further very shortly. We clear out this B-25J Mitchell at long distance thanks to a very sustained burst from our 20mm cannons, and that is thanks to the fact that I think I have 100% weapon maintenance on this aircraft. So with our third kill in the bag, we now look at this enemy 109F, not sure whether they are climbing up towards us or going after a friendly fighter. As soon as we go to come down on them, they break off towards a friendly hanging over the enemy airfield, and so we use another flat turn to come back around and begin our pursuit of the H-6K, which has warded off a friendly Messerschmitt 109F. As we can see at 3,500 metres altitude and a speed of 425 km an hour, we're roughly 1.2 km below the H-6K, and we can now climb rather vertically in order to take them out, as we will be able to conserve a good portion of energy to avoid an early stall. With only one 20mm cannon left because I've jammed the other one, I quickly dispatched the H-6K regardless, and I am now on the verge of a stall. Once again using my rudder in order to essentially force the ME-110 into a semi-hammerhead manoeuvre to bring myself back around and onto target, with my next target being the enemy G4M1. Whilst the G4M1 does go into a rather gradual dive, we can see that already we are able to match them for speed, and we soon intercept them, meaning that they decide to level out and try to use that rear 20mm gunner to take us out. Now their small dip does waver our shots for a small period of time, yet we very quickly kill that rear 20mm gunner and achieve our 6th kill. At this point we were considering attacking an enemy P400, yet at 2.5 km away they're too far away from us in terms of vertical altitude in order to be able to actually hit them successfully in a boom and zoom. We also have to contend with an enemy Yak-7B coming fresh out of spawn that has decided to use their rather substantial energy to try and come at us. Nonetheless, before they break into a stall, the pilot is aware of what I'm trying to do to them, and so they break down into a gradual dive. I instead optimise my pass for a D3A1 VAL, simply because if I can hit the VAL and do critical damage as I have, I will be able to boom and zoom back up past the Yak-7B before they can turn around onto me. Despite the fact in their small dive they have gained a good portion of energy, they cannot match me in this vertical climb, and so I can once again begin my loop, and if the Yak-7B decides to stall out, it's good for me, but here the Yak-7B once again decides to break off and start to build up their speed on the level or in a dive, simply because they know exactly what I'm trying to do here, and they're not going to react to it in the fashion that I would like. And so I level out and notice an enemy PBY off to the side of the map. So at 3,550 metres altitude and building, and with a speed of roughly 400 km an hour, I begin my pursuit of the PBY. Another rather easy but necessary kill. and whilst we make our way over, we will now discuss the overall altitude performance of the ME410A1. I find that this plane at roughly 3,500 up to 7,000 metres altitude performs at its best. If you can put this plane at altitudes of 4,000 metres or higher, and I have on a number of occasions escorted bombers up to 6,000 metres altitude, this plane will fly effortlessly by comparison with other heavy fighters. This plane is optimised for those altitudes, and below 3,000 metres you are going to find that building speed, energy and overall control responsiveness is quite dire by comparison with, say, the Ki-45 or indeed most of your mono-engine fighter counterparts. At the same time, at roughly an altitude of 8,000 metres or more, the performance of this plane starts to wane out, and I think that is comparable with the performance of the ME410 historically, or do not quote me on that. Additionally, we have to talk about the overall speed threshold to this aircraft, and we've already pointed out that the ailerons, the rudder and the overall responsiveness of this aircraft, bar the elevator, locks up horrendously at roughly 550 to 600 km an hour or more. At the same time, below a speed of 300 km an hour, this plane becomes incredibly sluggish in overall manoeuvrability, and as a result you need to stick to a speed range of roughly 350 to 450 km an hour to get the most out of it. Here we attack a H6K4 at roughly 480 km an hour, braking onto their back, and whilst we absorb a single 20mm round to our main fuselage, we quickly dispatch them for our 8th kill. We show here how our overall armament of a pair of 20mm cannons, being more than sufficient to take out the H6K, is far superior to that of, say, the Messerschmitt 109 F4 there, which only has the single 20mm that tried attacking the H6K originally. An assist gets racked up on that D3A1 from earlier, and we have an enemy P400 climbing up towards us. However, they are lured into our trap, and as they go to stall out, we come down on them very swiftly, using a combination of rudder and a flat turn in order to come round, turn off our engine and finish them off for our 9th kill, before braking back up at 500 km an hour speed to rebuild our altitude from 4,000 metres. I must admit I was keeping track of that P400 whilst attacking the H6K, as you may have seen, and we can see already that despite allowing the P400 to build up their position, we were able to counteract their efforts very quickly and efficiently thanks to our overall acceleration and speed retention. So, with 9 kills in the bag, I now opt not to go for the enemy IL-4, simply because I can see a Ki-61 and a Ki-45 both coming fresh out of spawn and climbing up towards me. Whilst I could have gone for the IL-4 here simply because I could have grabbed a kill before the end of the game, I wanted to see exactly how I could outmaneuver a pair of fighters which are far more nimble than myself, one fighter, one heavy fighter. The Ki-61 breaks just outside of my firing line, and the Ki-45 Otsu almost manages to bring their 37mm cannon onto me. As I go into a secondary loop, the Ki-61 has gone into a dive and is building up their energy. Whilst the Ki-45 was an optimal target, I realised that to kill off the most important target, I have to go for the Ki-61 that can build up their energy much more quickly. This allows me to achieve my double ace, and it's at this point that I use my speed retained from that loop and from coming out of the overall dive in order to put distance between myself and that Ki-45 at an immense rate. Whilst they are trying to fire cannon rounds towards us, we're already roughly 1.6 kilometres away, and we've made it to the end of the game unscathed. And so it's time to look at some post-game stats once again. Hence, from this second game we can see that our 10 kills and single assist allowed us to earn 42,080 silver lions. On top of that, we earned 1,858 research points, with 743 going towards our research on the ME163B Comet. We thereby conclude the review of the ME410A1 by realising that it is an aircraft that, by comparison with, say, the Beaufighter Mark 6C, has to be employed in an aggressive defensive style role. For a good portion of your time, whilst this may sound contradictory, you will have to react to your opponents. As we saw in that first game, to inherit the higher altitude position, we had to react to the fact that Spitfire F Mark 9 was well above us in terms of altitude. We avoided them, we dived down to lower altitudes, boom and zoomed a couple of targets, and then broke up and reconsolidated our position. At which point the Spitfire F Mark 9 was consumed with friendlies, and not only that, we bagged ourselves a Thunderbolt in the ensuing chaos, along with the Spitfire in the end when they were forced into an uncomfortable position whereby they had to deal with us, a friendly bomber, and friendly fighters all climbing up towards them. And at the same time that is reciprocated in this second game. We were very aggressive at the start. We used our decent acceleration and very powerful climb rate for a heavy fighter to climb above the bulk of the enemy formation and tackle that Focke-Wulf 190 A4 head on, because that was where they least expected us right at the start of the game. And really, if you want to beat an ME410 A1, you have to force it into a low altitude turn fight, or a turn fight at any altitude. As really, whilst this plane does turn quite nicely on the horizontal, it can by no means match the turn circle of any mono-engined aircraft, or indeed any of the other heavy fighters in my opinion. We can see by comparison the rest of our team that we came first by a significant margin, and that was because we managed to achieve the position that the ME410 A1 craves. A moderate to high altitude position of roughly 3,500 meters altitude or more, extending up to roughly 7,000 meters altitude. On top of that, we kept our speed to an average of roughly 400 km an hour, so because that is where the control surfaces all react well, despite the fact you have a rather weak rudder, a roll rate which is sufficient although locks up incredibly quickly beyond 550 to 600 km an hour, and the elevators are quite responsive at all speeds. Again, you have a very powerful armament in terms of the 220mm, and as a result this plane is optimised for attacking the enemy bombers at your battle rating, as well as ripping apart enemy fighters that come into your firing line. Although do remember the proviso that as soon as an enemy fighter breaks out of your firing line and you cannot provide the lead anymore, it is ideal to break off, because otherwise if you try to engage them through successive manoeuvres and turn fights, it is only going to end badly. At the same time, if you see an enemy fighter diving at you at roughly say 1.5 km away, you will need to quickly initiate a dive, otherwise you will find that they will be able to catch up to you and rip you to pieces in the eventuality, as I have found against Typhoon Mark 1Bs time and time again. If you're looking for a Howling Hornet that is able to essentially give a nasty sting to its opponents when they do not respect its overall territorial boundaries, the ME410A1 is the heavy fighter for you. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. Yet until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.